Dying to Get Well is a podcast created by mother-daughter team Alyssa and Michelle.
We will be covering an array of topics that we are passionate about, such as substance use disorder, true crime, and mental and physical health disorders.
You can find us online at dyingtogetwell.net, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, or Facebook.
If you have a story that you'd like to share with us, please feel free to contact us.
Hi, and welcome to Dying to Get Well with mother-daughter team Alyssa and Michelle. We originally started this show on KCAA Radio out of Redlands, California. They're a great station, but recently we decided for our convenience to go out on our own and start a podcast.
We began the show primarily to talk about substance use disorder. I'm a recovering addict myself, and my mother has experiences with addiction through her family throughout her entire life.
Today, for our first episode, we decided to branch out into true crime, particularly drug-induced crime. On September 15, 1976, a little boy was born in Texas. He grew up poor in the projects. As a child, he developed a love of writing and reading poetry. Something about rhyme and the way the words flowed off the page and into the air made him feel happy, perhaps even calm. As a teenager, this boy had the same happy feeling when listening to rap music. The raw lyrics seemed to speak to him and his experiences as an African-American teen growing up in the projects. At the age of 17, he began to write and freestyle rap. He decided to move out to California to where his father lived so that he could be amongst the other rap stars. Was Anton Singleton, a.k.a. G Spade, a.k.a. Big Lurch. This is a story about how Sherm changed his life forever. What is Sherm? It's a cigarette or marijuana, and it's laced with embalming fluids and also PCP. The embalming fluids actually are a solvent to carry the PCP. So people dip the marijuana cigarettes or the joint inside of the embalming fluids and the PCP. PCP is actually a drug also known as angel dust, and also can be called wet if it's smoked from a dipped cigarette or from marijuana. PCP was first used in the 60s as an anesthetic, but then it was discovered to be mind-altering and cause hallucinations and disrupt perceptions of sound and cause violent behavior. So with Big Lurch, it looks like, he has a different side of a story than what is typically being said or what was said during the court process. Big Lurch, his side of the story is he came out to California from Texas to get in the rap business, and he did some rapping on a couple of different albums. He was featured on a couple of different people's albums, and he then he went into the studio with a producer named Mike Mosley.
No, I've never heard of Big Lurch before this. What kind of music does he do? He does rap, but what kind of rap specifically?
Well, that's a good question. So Big Lurch, originally when he came out, he was just doing some rapping of his own, and he was called G Spade. So when he was in Texas, he called himself G Spade, but they decided to call him Big Lurch because he's 6'7". He's a big guy, and I don't know if you remember the Addams Family.
I remember.
There was a Lurch, so they named him after Lurch on the Addams Family.
Yeah.
So then, basically, he came out here, and he was kind of recognized by Mike Mosley. I guess the story is like Big Lurch was staying in a garage, and Mike Mosley took had some sympathy for the situation, and so he entered in the studio and was doing some rapping over there at the studio, but Mike Mosley was really busy, so Big Lurch started rapping with a couple other guys, and those other guys, they formed their own little group called Cosmic Slop Shop. And when you ask, like, what kind of rapping, well, basically it was a subgenre of what they call horrorcore.
Mm-hmm. I've heard of that.
You've heard of horrorcore.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's kind of a horror-themed, the lyric and the contents are horror-themed.
And they're pretty crude lyrics.
They're really crude, and one of his songs definitely was very crude. I didn't listen to the song itself, but I read the lyrics, and I was like, okay, it's like talks about Freddy Krueger. It's called I Did It To You, and it talks about Freddy Krueger. It talks about Jeffrey Dahmer. It talks about, murder.
Like shock music almost.
Yeah, well, and some other people who are actually in the horrorcore are ICP, Insane Clown Posse, which I know that you've listened to because I've heard some of their music through you. The Ghetto Boys, Gravediggers, Bone Thugs and Harmony, Eminem with his song about Kim. There's actually a story that Big Lurch had heard the song about where Eminem was talking about killing Kim,
right?
And that like kind of influenced him to want to go into this genre because he saw that Eminem was gaining a lot of popularity from that song,
right?
So that kind of influenced him. And then there's also some stories that basically the music producers were pushing him in the direction of being more and more shocking and being more and more violent. And so,
right.
So what ended up happening, according to Big Lurch, he went out and he was doing some rapping, and they created an album, The Cosmic Slop Shop, but it didn't really sell. It didn't go very far. And then he went home to Texas when he was I think one day away from his 24th birthday. He went back to Texas because his grandma died, so he went out there for her funeral. Well, the next day after his 24th birthday, he was in a severe car accident, and he suffered a broken neck and he was paralyzed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so he ended up in the hospital.
Wait, he was paralyzed?
Yeah. He was paralyzed for a while because his neck was broken. So
right.
he ended up in the hospital, and he got addicted to morphine. And so it said that he was addicted to the morphine, and then when he returned to L.A. or California, someone, I'm sorry, I'm trying to think of the guy. He's the head of Stress Free Records. He had already signed, Big Lurch had at this point already signed a deal with Stress Free Records. And the guy who's the owner of Stress Free Records actually is an attorney as well. And that attorney's name is Milton Grimes. Milton Grimes actually represented Rodney King, and he has his own record label called Stress Free Records. Well, basically...
so he's an attorney and he works as a record producer?
That's right. Actually, he owns Stress Free Records.
Oh, wow.
He's the president. So he had already signed a deal with Stress Free Records, Big Lurch had, before he went back to Texas and got into this accident. So he says that Milton Grimes helped him get out of the hospital, helped him, and brought him back out to California to continue to record. However, before he left, he wasn't real happy in general with recording at the studio with Milton Grimes' studio, because at that studio there were a lot of gang members and a lot of gang stuff was going on, and it was making him uncomfortable.
Yeah.
He says, I think he basically said that he claims as a blood, and there were a lot of Crips around. So he was feeling uncomfortable, and there was like some fighting, some feuding going on and stuff. So it wasn't like the studio that he was at before. Prior to that, he was enjoying going in every day and creating songs. But at this studio, there was tension.
Right.
So he basically kind of left and started doing what he used to do. And what he used to do in Dallas, he used to also sell dope, basically. So he went back out on the streets and was selling dope. He even ran some drug houses, and he was smoking PCP. But according to people around him, or according to some reports, he was addicted to PCP because of the pain that he was in.
Right.
But that hasn't really been confirmed, because when you hear Big Lurch talk about it, he says that, when he smoked the Sherm, that was like the first time he really did it, because he was doing it basically to impress the people that he was around.
Right. And the story might seem cut and dry, but there's a lot of layers to this story, so you have to keep an open mind.
Right. And that's kind of how I'm seeing it, because when I first heard it, I was like, oh my God, that's horrific, because the story is horrific. But then when I listened to Big Lurch actually tell his story, I'm like, oh, that's a whole different take on the story, right?
Right.
So basically what happened on April 10th, 2002, Big Lurch was high on Sherm, PCP. And he had been smoking it with his roommate. And the roommate, Thomas, was dating a girl by the name of Tynesha. And Tynesha stayed in an apartment which Big Lurch was also funding, which was the drug house. And there's mixed stories about how it went down. Basically, one story is that Big Lurch and some guys were there partying at the apartment, and Big Lurch told them all to leave, including Tynesha's boyfriend. And the other story is that Big Lurch went there looking for more PCP, knocked on the door, and forced his way in. But what we do know is that Tynesha was hit in the head with a scooter, like a kid's scooter. Her kids were at school. It was during the daytime, and Big Lurch is accused of hitting her in the head with a scooter. She had a broken eye socket, a broken jaw. Her cheek was bit. Her chest was ripped open. She was sliced with a knife and then ripped open. Her chest was ripped open, and her lung was taken out.
Wow.
And then she was also stabbed with a 3-inch blade in her shoulder.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. It's reported that her friend Alyssa, which was in an apartment nearby, was looking out her window and saw a man running down the street naked, covered in blood, looking up at the sky. And then she realized that man was Big Lurch, and she called 911. And then she ran over to Tynesha's apartment, her friend, and found her friend there dead on the floor.
Yeah.
So at this point, Big Lurch says that he woke up 2 weeks later after smoking the PCP in the LA County jail, and the detectives asked him what does he remember, and he said all he remembers is smoking the PCP, thinking the world was going to end, and that he needed to kill the devil. He needed to find and kill the devil.
Wow.
So, I mean, what we know about PCP is it can make you have delusions, make you angry, can cause schizophrenia. We have family members who have schizophrenia, so we know somewhat what that's like. I had an uncle who took some angel dust, and he was never right after that. He crawled up underneath the sink and got caught and stuck, and my dad had to take the cabinet apart to get him out. And then, because he said he was a snake, so he got up in there. And then he also planted a pin outside and said, look at the flowers growing off the pin. But he was never right. He would have what they call flashbacks throughout his life, and he ended up shooting himself eventually, when he was an adult. But Big Lurch, back to him, as far as what happened next, he basically says that, he came to in the LA County jail, and then Milton Grimes was his attorney. He'd already had an arraignment. He didn't remember any of it. He just completely blacked out. His memory was gone of all of it. And he was told that there was flesh and flesh in his stomach. Oh, also he was when he was standing outside, it's reported that he had her lung in his hand, Tanisha's lung in his hand.
Wow.
Yeah. So Milton Grimes had already taken over his case and assured him that the best defense for him would be whatever sounded the worst. Basically, we need to make this look really bad so that you don't get the death penalty, to keep you alive, basically. And so he listened to him, but he also put him on Haldol, which Haldol basically is a drug that is psychotropic, and it makes you just completely checked out. You don't even know what's going on. When I worked in a group home, the kids would sometimes come in on Haldol, and they couldn't hardly speak, and they'd almost, one of them was even drooling, and the nurse there would always take them off all the meds, especially Haldol, and figure out what their issue was and get them on the proper medication. But Haldol was just kind of a drug that kind of silences you.
Right.
So this attorney, owner of the records company, who apparently they were also having a feud, Big Lurch and him weren't getting along before all this happened, is now representing him, and is now telling him that it needs to look really, really bad. So,
why did he want him to make it look really bad? What is that? What do you mean?
I guess his point was the worse, the crazier you look, the better, because if they think you're crazy, then they won't.
He could plead insanity.
He led him to believe he could plead insanity. However, in the state of California, if you're using drugs and you commit a crime, you cannot use the plea of insanity.
Right.
So he also did not go. He did not say that he was insane. He said yes, he was on PCP. So he didn't actually have him plead insanity. And even when asked, according to Big Lurch, even when he was asked by the judge, do you know that if the defendant was ever mentally ill? He said no. But according to Big Lurch, there were at least